Well, if anyone wants to know how socialism ends, or not even necessarily ends, this is essentially the beginning of the end. This isn't the end, because after the end comes something new. You know, the leader's thrown out, killed, something happens to the leader of the country, something else or someone else comes into power, changes the whole political system, the government system, and says, we're not going to do this whole socialist thing again. You know, here's what we're going to do. That's the end. What I'm about to read you and what I've been reading you about Venezuela is essentially the beginning of the end. Submitted by Susan Warner via the Gatestone Institute from Zero Hedge here. Venezuela's death spiral. A dozen eggs cost $150 as hyperinflation horrors hit socialist utopia. The question of whether socialism can be an effective economic system was famously raised when Margaret Thatcher said of the British Labour Party, quote, I think they've made the biggest financial mess that any government's ever made in this country for a very long time. And socialist governments traditionally do make a financial mess. They always run out of other people's money. It's quite a characteristic of them. They then start to nationalize everything. End quote. There are dire reports of people waiting in supermarket lines all day only to discover that expected food deliveries never arrived and the shelves are empty. There are horrific tales of desperate people slaughtering zoo animals to provide their only meal of the day. I already covered that. Remember the prized horse, the black stallion, the, what was that thing? The Arabian, you know, whatever, what was that, black stallion? Even household pets are targeted as a much-needed source of food. President Maduro is doubling down on the proven failed policies and philosophies of Bolivarian socialism, while diverting attention away from the crisis, pointing fingers at so-called enemies of Venezuela, such as the United States, Saudi Arabia, and others. And while that may actually be true, that don't change the fact of how socialism ends. And again, in this case, the beginning of the end. Make sure those cats don't get in there.
I'm looking for the big, long piece of paper we have.
No idea.
Yeah.
So a dozen eggs was last reported to cost $150, and the International Monetary Fund, quote, predicts that inflation in Venezuela will hit 720% this year. They were saying that, you know, many months ago, as the year was just starting. You know, we just got into 2016. I remember doing the videos on it. That's the exact number that was quoted. For many Venezuelans, by every economic, social, and political measure, their nation is unraveling at breakneck speed. Severe shortages of food, clean water, electricity, medicines, and hospital supplies punctuate a dire scenario of crime-ridden streets in the impoverished neighborhoods of this nearly failed OPEC state, which at one time claimed to be the most prosperous nation in Latin America. Kind of like the Roman Empire claimed, and it was a truthful claim, was the most powerful empire on the face of the earth before it crashed. And there's just happens to be another really powerful empire today that's on its way out. I'm about to say, I'll give you a silver coin if you can tell me who. Hell no. I'd be broke. I'd give away all my silver because you know the answer to that one. USA. 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 Today, a once comfortable, middle-class Venezuelan father is scrambling desperately to find his family's next meal, sometimes hunting through garbage for salvageable food. The unfortunate 75% majority of Venezuelans already suffering extreme poverty are reportedly verging on starvation. Darkness is falling on Hugo Chavez's once famous Bolivarian revolution that some policy experts only a short time ago thought would never end. In a 2007 study on the Chavez years for the Washington, D.C. based Center for Economic and Policy Research, Mark Weisbrot and Luis Sandoval wrote, "At present, it does not appear that the current economic expansion is about to end any time in the near future. The gains in poverty reduction, employment, education, and healthcare that have occurred in the last few years are likely to continue along with the expansion." End quote. While it was not so long ago that many people heralded Venezuela as Latin America's successful utopian socialist experiment, something has gone dreadfully wrong, as the revolution's Marxist founder, Hugo Chavez, turned his Chavismo dream into an economic nightmare of unimaginable proportions. The question of whether socialism can be an effective economic system was famously raised when Margaret Thatcher said of the British Party, which I'll repeat, "I think they've made the biggest financial mess that any government's ever made in this country for a very long time, and a socialist government traditionally, or not a, but and socialist governments traditionally do make a financial mess. They always run out of other people's money. It's quite a characteristic of them. They then start to nationalize everything, and people just do not like more and more nationalization, and they're now trying to control everything by other means." So in short, the trouble with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. That's the, if you could give someone a one-liner, and they say, just briefly, I got 5 seconds. What is socialism? Socialism is taking other people's money, and then when you run out of it, you have an empty bag to stare out and major problems in society. So once again, the trouble with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. When President Nicolas Maduro inherited the Venezuelan socialist dream in April of 2013, just 1 month after Chavez died, he was facing a mere 53% inflation rate. Today, the Venezuelan bolivar is virtually worthless, and inflation is creeping to 500% with expectations of much more. A recent Washington Post report stated, "Markets expect Venezuela to default on its debt in the very near future. The country is basically bankrupt. It is not easy for a nation to go bankrupt with the largest oil reserves in the world, but Venezuela has managed it. How? Well, a combination of bad luck and worse policies. The first step was when Hugo Chavez's socialist government started spending more money on the poor with everything from 2-cent gasoline to free housing. That may all seem like it's a good idea in general, but only as long as there's money to spend. And by 2005 or so, Venezuela didn't have any." Now, I'd like to just say something. How is it that the United States of America can go from $9 trillion in debt, 2008, to almost $20 trillion in debt? It's now 19.5 trillion. Almost 20 trillion in 8 years. We still have strong dollar, strong dollar, strong dollar. Our dollar ain't going anywhere. It's still in the 90-something range for the dollar index. But a little tiny country like Venezuela that didn't print nowhere near the amount of money the United States has printed is having these problems. Socialism or not, right? Take socialism out of the picture, and I think the club would still be able to crush Venezuela. After all, they dropped oil prices from near 100, 90-something, near 100, down to 50 and below. It's the same tactic that they used after 2008, $150 a barrel oil that Lindsey Williams said they would do. Prior to it hitting 150, he called that. And then after it hit 150, he said, by the way, I know it's 150 like today, 146. It's going down to $50 before the very beginning of next year. By December, it was down in the 50s, and then 45, then 40. And he said the reason they were doing that was to bankrupt all these oil-producing nations, which includes the Middle East. He said because they built up their economies over the years, now they're reliant on $80, $90, $100 oil, and they can't survive with prices that low. Now, strangely enough, they seem to have survived, and they've accumulated a lot more debt, by the way. Maybe that was part of the plan too. But they've survived all these years since 2008. But the price of oil did rebound. Again, it was about $100. So here we go, 2016, the very end of 2015, actually, price, which was 90 something, whatever it was, I think in the beginning of 2015, somewhere around there, drops down to 50 and below. And it just can't seem to keep that $50 mark. So again, this isn't just a socialist problem in Venezuela. This is a club problem trying to indebt all the nations of the world, get them in serious amounts of debt, borrow, 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 so that when they pull the trigger on the world economy, everybody's in the same boat. However, when you have a socialist country that you're doing this to, it just makes things that much worse. Chavez had the good fortune to die just before the Grim Reaper showed up on Venezuela's doorstep, according to policy specialist Jose Cardenas. What began as a war against the squalid oligarchy in order to build what he called the 21st century socialism, cheered on as he was by many leftists from abroad, has collapsed into an unprecedented heap of misery and conflict. Maduro is doubling down on the failed Chavismo economic and social policies that have contributed to an inflationary crisis not seen since the days of the 1920s Weimar Republic in Germany, when the cost of a loaf of bread was a wheelbarrow full of cash. Demonstrations and public cries for food are the unpleasant evidence of a once prosperous society being torn apart by the very largesse that marked its utopian ideals less than a decade ago. There are dire reports of people waiting in supermarket lines all day, only to discover that expected food deliveries never arrived and the shelves are empty. In desperation, some middle-class families have organized online barter clubs as helpless citizens seek to trade anything for diapers and baby food, powdered milk, medicines, toilet paper, and other essentials missing from store shelves or available only on the black market for double and triple already impossibly high inflated prices. As things continue to worsen, President Maduro, unfortunately, is doubling down on the proven failed policies and philosophies of the socialism, or Bolivarian socialism, as they called it, while diverting attention away from the crisis, pointing fingers at the so-called enemies of Venezuela, such as the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and others. Efforts to convince Maduro to enlist help from outside have failed, according to a report in the Catholic magazine Crux. Maduro has refused to accept help from international charitable organizations, including the Vatican-sponsored Caritas Internationalis, which, through different affiliates, has tried to send medicine and food. Denying that there's a crisis and refusing to let the world send medicine and food is not possible, said Cardinal George Urosa Savino, Archbishop of Caracas. The prelate believes that Maduro is refusing to accept help in an attempt to hide the very grave situation of total shortage, which, far from improving, he said, continues to deteriorate. There's a little bit more to this story. This is how it ends. This is how these types of countries and this type of governmental system, socialism, it never goes well. And if you can't tell, the Democrats, at least at this point in time, and again, I normally don't point fingers at Democrats or Republicans because they're all part of the same team. But damn it, right now the Democrats are just bringing everybody, refugees, immigrants, Mexicans, anybody that can vote, we'll take you. And we'll put you up, we'll get you in housing, we'll do whatever we can. Put you on the old welfare system. This is a sense of socialism. We're going to have more poor people coming in that can't contribute to society. What are a bunch of Syrian refugees and North African refugees, which I just read they want to add in 2017, they want to bring in 110,000 to this country, by the way. The Obama administration, and of course, if Clinton takes over, it's more of the same. What are these people going to do to contribute to our society? It's a whole different lifestyle. It's a whole different viewpoint of the world. It's a whole different ideology. It's a whole different religious, everything about him. These people over here, it can't mix. It's like water and oil. They cannot mix. So what are they going to do? They'll steal, break in. There'll be more, crime will go up, break-ins will go up, more people in jail, and you're going to pay for it. So again, what happens when they run out of our or other people's money? Again, it's the beginning of the end, and America's got a way to go, but, this is we're doing textbook, check, Yep, on our way down to the socialist and end of the American dream as we know it, checkbox list, boop, boop, all the way down. Well, I think I've had about enough of this article. Take care.